Welcome to Truth Sentinel, watching over the truth in the news. Today we're going to talk about all things related to the apocalypse and the end times. The subject of end times is known as eschatology, and the word apocalypse comes from the Greek, meaning uncovering what has been hidden, a revelation of the truth. Many people find the idea of an apocalypse alluring, and we're going to look at issues connected to that, and later our guest will be L.A. Marzulli, who will focus on the biblical perspective. Seth Davis from 2 Real News will be sitting on the side of that conversation as well. We'll talk about natural disasters which feature in Christian and Islamic end-time prophecies, wars, false prophets, one world government, financial collapse, societal breakdown, Nephilim. Personally, I've always been interested in the book of Revelations, Daniel, and other books in the Bible that talk about the end times, the mark of the beast, and the Antichrist, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. If you're a young man growing up in church, it's more exciting than maybe singing hymns. These feelings of interest in the apocalypse are obviously shared by others. There's lots of movies made about the event, End of Days with Arnold Schwarzenegger, also TV series that allude to the dead walking the earth, which was also mentioned in some of the apocalyptic prophecies. So you have series like very popular TV series like The Walking Dead. Also, ISIS continue to dominate the headlines, and they're also interested in end times, as they believe that they will fight infidel forces in the town of Dabiq, and this will be the start of the apocalypse. Jihad for them appears to be a fast-track way to gain access to heaven. The Bible talks of a different area in Israel near the Sea of Galilee called Megiddo, where the name Armageddon comes from, and where the final battle will take place. I'm joined by Anthony now, our resident researcher and atheist, over near the foothills of the Himalayas. I can't remember how many meters above sea level, near the highest ice rink in the world. Anthony's gonna give his take on apocalyptic events. Anthony, I believe you wanted to say something about the apocalypse and the prophecies, and I hope you're not going to ruin everything and say you don't think it's going to happen.
Don't worry, I won't. How are you, Scott?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks.
You're right. This idea of the apocalypse has been part of, in fact, most cultures and religions, and in modern culture it pops up in various forms. And to some extent, I think the appeal is partly just in the kind of grisly nature of these stories, but I think there's a much deeper attraction as well. We can kind of look at it in a few different ways. For a start, every good apocalypse has 2 key ingredients. Of course, you have to have the cataclysmic event, that destroys the world as we know it, and that's important. It is the world as we know it. It isn't the world per se. So it could be divine punishment or meteor impact or whatever. But actually, the most important ingredient is that you need a small group of people to survive the cataclysm. And if you've got those 2 things, then you've got a scenario that has certain ethical possibilities embedded in it. There's in a lot of apocalyptic tales, there's this idea that somewhere along the path of our development, things have gone a bit wrong, and so we aren't quite the society that we're meant to be, right? And sociologists and philosophers have studied this idea quite extensively. For example, there's an Australian philosopher, Matthew Beard, who says that a lot of people feel there are ethical constraints on society, partly because we've inherited various social traditions and a range of institutions and power structures that make things operate in certain ways, and they aren't easy to change. And this is something we say quite often on the show. The political and economic structures that represent power in our world do affect the ethical tone of human behavior in some ways. And there are big problems with a lot of those institutions, but they're held in place by money and power and so on. But if you could sweep them away and start again, then that would open up some possibilities for creating a more moral society. So this guy Matthew Beard has studied what happens if you remove these constraints, and he's looked in particular at the computer game Fallout. This is a game where you have to negotiate a post-apocalyptic world by joining up with other people and making certain choices. And he says that when you analyze the gameplay in Fallout, you get a strong sense of players wanting to exercise ethical freedom so they can make good moral choices, without being hamstrung by the laws and the institutions of our world. Some philosophers call this the ethical sandbox, this idea of, going back to basics and working out what good and moral behavior really is. And it's a theme you see in all kinds of places. I think Mr. Marzulli is going to talk about some flood stories later, right? And that's a great example, because the world gets cleansed in all these stories, like Gilgamesh and the Noah story from the Bible. And so the world gets a second chance, and can kind of remake itself in a more moral way. And, that theme continues right through to movies like Fight Club, where, you had this idea of taking out, like, the entire financial system, which holds the world's economic order in place, and starting again, on a kind of level playing field. And that's basically the flood story, just applied to banks and financial markets. So this ethical sandbox idea crosses over into another big question as well, which is whether humans are inherently good and altruistic, or inherently evil and selfish. And again, that idea goes right back through our myths and our literature and so on. And so imagining this apocalypse is one way to put us mentally in a space where we can try and work through this issue of, are we good or are we not?
I guess more recent movies would be Star Wars, which is the big theme in Star Wars is fight between good and evil as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fight between good and evil for sure. Yeah, and it's an examination of good and evil. Why is one character good and one character is evil? I don't know if you have read any of the analyses of the rebels, which paint the rebels as a group of terrorists. Have you read any of that stuff?
I've seen some people sort of trying to allude that some of the good characters are very similar to some of the sort of terrorists that we talk about in modern times. Like, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting take on that movie. I think there's certainly something to it. But it's this imagining apocalypse. It's similar in a way to imagining a group of people on a desert island, which is again a recurring theme in literature. For example, the William Golding classic novel Lord of the Flies. I read this at school, and it's still a prescribed text in some high schools, I believe.
I was
in that story.
Read it too. Yeah.
Oh yeah, did you like it?
I thought it was okay. It was definitely more interesting than some other books that we read. Yeah, for sure.
So you remember, these guys are these young boys are marooned, and it's about what kind of society they create on the island. And Golding decides that if you had this, starting again, this ethical sandbox, you'd end up with a dystopia. So you'd have physically strong people dominating weak people. You'd have others using the situation to manipulate, and ultimately you'd have misery and suffering. Then if you compare that to something like the TV series Lost, in that case you had a much more kind of mixed picture. You had some people using their ethical freedom for selfish means, and some others using it truly ethically. So these are, I guess, different ways of approaching the same question of what happens if we can go back to the ethical sandbox. In the social sciences, lots of people have looked at this question as well, and one of the most famous, and arguably one of the most misunderstood, was Karl Marx. Most people kind of see Marx as a political agitator, but actually he was a historian. This was his kind of role in life, and he had a theory. His theory was that to find the main currents that kind of underlie human history, you have to look specifically at our economic history. And if you do that, you can actually see us progressing in a single direction all the way from classical times up to now. But unfortunately, he decided that the trend has always been towards more and more economic imbalance and inequality, because fewer and fewer people control the means of production at every kind of stage of historical development. And the means of production is the means of creating a comfortable life for ourselves. So this is how, he was in a sense the first person to talk about, the privileged 1%. He was talking about that hundreds of years before it was, before we were. So this is how he hit upon the idea of communism. It was basically like a kind of huge leap into the next stage of economic history, and he thought that the industrial capitalist age was a tipping point, because it was such an extreme form of imbalance that we really couldn't go much further down this path of inequality. You know, he thought that at some point people would just go, wait a second, that's too far, and demand a more equitable system. But to get that system, you'd have to wash away what humans had achieved so far, because their inherently selfish instincts had messed everything up. And that's why Marxist movements have tended to be revolutionary movements, because a revolution is kind of a socio-economic apocalypse, you know. So again, you have this kind of theory of this idea of washing everything away to start again. Yeah. And I sometimes wonder, you know, whether Fight Club, for example, is kind of a little bit informed by Marx's ideas. But anyway, on a more sort of personal dimension, in these apocalyptic stories, you often get these hero characters emerging. And, you know, humans have always told each other stories about heroes because we want to understand how we can become like better versions of ourselves. And this is one way to understand that. So with things like The Walking Dead, which you mentioned earlier, at the center of that story, you've got this guy, Rick Grimes, and he's just a fairly ordinary person with a few skills, but then suddenly he becomes the leader of a group, and he has to become a better version of himself. So all the way through the show, he's contrasted with this other character, Shane, who goes bad, so to speak. And whereas Rick sort of manages his various, shortcomings and his moral fallibility and so on, and so he becomes the hero. And you've got a prize at the end of The Walking Dead, which is another like important part of hero tales and also apocalypse stories. For example, if you go back to the Odyssey, the most famous ancient Greek hero story, the main character Odysseus gets to reunite with his wife if he makes it through, the underworld and various other trials on his way back to Ithaca. Now, Odysseus is a flawed individual, but he kind of rises above himself, and so he gets the prize. And it's the same with Rick Grimes. His prize is his son, Carl. So his goal is to pass these moral tests, which is sort of a metaphor for proving that he's a worthy father. And again, you need the ethical sandbox. You need the apocalypse to be able to really test him and see if he's a hero. So that's definitely another reason why apocalypse tales have always appealed to people. But there's one more which I personally think doesn't say particularly great stuff about humans, and that's the desire to feel special and feel chosen over others. Because if you survive an apocalypse, you're special more or less by definition. Yeah, most people don't survive. You do. But then in a lot of the stories, the people who live through it are survivors for a reason. As you said, Islamic State believes in a version of the apocalypse, and in their version, it's the true believers who make it through, whereas all the infidels, so anyone sort of morally questionable, they all die. Yeah? And of course, we all hate ISIS, but if we're honest with ourselves, we can find echoes of that story in lots of other stories that are believed by other people who are alive today. You've got the rapture, for example. And that's kind of similar in a way. In that story, the pure believers float up into heaven. They lose their clothes, they float up into the sky, and then the world is destroyed while they're on the way up. So that's all about people wanting to be chosen, wanting to be special. And it's the same with the story of Exodus in the Bible. God intervenes on behalf of the tribes of Israel, and he turns Egypt into this kind of post-apocalyptic nightmare with, frogs and boils and plagues and so on. Because he has to save these chosen ones. And look, that's not to single out the Bible. I'm using it as an example because it's a familiar one. But you find the same theme everywhere. And so as long as we have all of those desires to kind of remake the world ethically, to find kind of the heroic part of ourselves and to feel special, you're always going to find these apocalyptic stories. But I think from all of that we can at least take a little bit of good news. Things may seem kind of scary and apocalyptic like right now in the world, and I've heard a lot of World War III predictions in the last year or two, most recently with Russia and Turkey squabbling with each other. But in fact, we've always lived in apocalyptic times. They have been apocalyptic right throughout our history because we've made them like that. So I think we can relax at least a little, knowing that every generation has thought that, the end of the world was nigh, and yet here we are. So I don't know. What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, there's been lots of people predicting the end of the world, and they've often been wrong. But at some point, someone's going to get it right, and then we're not going to be around to congratulate them, really, are we? But it does seem that a lot of religions do believe we're living in end times. I know a lot of people in the Christian religion do, but also in Islam as well. I guess it's because a lot of people think that in end times the world's going to reach a state where there's going to be lawlessness and evil is going to sort of be prevalent on the earth. And some people would say we're in that kind of time now. And of course, people will point to prophecies as well in their holy books, which seem to allude to current events. But of course, they can be misinterpreted, or everything is open to interpretation. I don't know. I agree with what you're saying about people want. When society or things do reach a certain point where they're not happy with them, they want it to start again. They want it to be cleansed. And for some people, they might want to be heroes. But I think that's probably a more prevalent thing, is that people want to start again and have hope of a different kind of future. That they feel like things are out of control now. And I think anyone who gives a specific date should definitely be treated with caution. But as to whether it is the end of the world, well, I think we can only wait and see. Regarding prophecies, which we'll be talking with L.A. Marzulli, well, again, there are some specific things mentioned in some of these holy books, and they can be watched. There's a lot of Christians waiting for the Antichrist. I think the same with Islam, actually, and there are specific events like, the Antichrist agreeing a peace treaty in the Middle East and things like that. So people are waiting for these things to happen. And if they do, then, and also the mark of the beast, no one's going to be able to buy and sell unless they have this kind of mark on their forehead or right hand. I believe it was the right hand anyway.
Do you remember the period in time, I don't remember exactly when this was, when there was a widespread theory that barcodes were actually the mark of the beast? Do you remember that?
I think for some people that's still the case, because there's two parallel lines, three sets of parallel lines, which actually in the barcode system do represent 6. So people said, that is 6, and then the 666 basically. Yeah.
And you can't buy and sell unless you have the mark.
That's what that. For a long time, people have believed it's the barcode. But
by the way, I don't think we can lay this completely at the feet of Abrahamic religions either. I mean, I remember going to an end of the world party in the 90s. I went to a couple of those actually, but I remember one in somewhere in the mid 90s, and it was the party to celebrate the end of the world, and it was because some Buddhist sect had declared, whatever it was, the 18th of February the world's going to end. So a friend of mine had a party on the 17th. So I think it as I said before, it turns up. It turns up everywhere. It's very cross-cultural,
Of course, also on a darker note, we could always say the world has already ended, and we are living in the simulated universe that we spoke of before.
Well, that is another aspect of it as well. There's the idea that conventionally apocalypse is a huge event that happens very suddenly, but there are philosophers. I believe Slavoj Žižek might be one of these philosophers who says the apocalypse actually is more like the frog in boiling water. So it happens in tiny stages and we don't realize, and we are now living in it or have already been through it.
Well, I'm glad you said his name and not me. That sounds like a difficult one to pronounce. But anyway, should we go over to L.A. Marzulli and get his take on the biblical prophecies and end times?
Yeah, let's.
Just a quick advert break. Our email is scottsentinel9@gmail.com. Check out our past episodes. We've got lots of interesting guests, and you can find us on YouTube on 2 channels. We talk about conspiracies, mysteries, injustices, corruption, religion, war, peace. You can leave your own message and we can base our show around what you think. That's what we intend to do.
Help us find the truth in the news.
Find our YouTube channels. We've got all the episodes on there. Truth Sentinel and Truth Sentinel 1. Subscribe to both so you get notified of everything. Click on the About section, you'll find all the links. Have you got something you'd like to advertise? If it's truth related, honest and ethical, get in contact. You can help us, we can help you. We sell our own t-shirts with "The Greatest Enemy of Truth is Blind Belief in Authority" on the back. Just $20 plus postage and packing. Let us know your size, just send us an email, we can sort it out. We've also teamed up with trutht-shirts.com, and they make political t-shirts. Let people know where you stand, basically. Use the code TRUTH1, you get a 10% discount, and we get a donation. They make all kinds of political t-shirts, and they can customize them for you as well. If you've got any ideas for publicity stunts, get in contact. We need to escalate this channel, make it much bigger. We need your help. Please support us. Thank you.
So today we have Bible prophecy expert, author and movie maker L.A. Marzulli. We chatted to L.A. in our episode on evolution, Noah's Ark and the Nephilim. L.A.'s new book, Days of Chaos, is now out. I think it's billed as an end times handbook, which is the main theme of today's show. And Watchers 9 is also out. We're honoured to be able to have L.A. back. L.A., welcome back to Truth Sentinel.
Hey, great to be here, guys. Seth, Scott, thanks for having me on.
Total pleasure to have you.
L.A., first of all, I wanted to start by saying I'm presuming Revelations and Daniel are the main books that contain end times prophecies. But for people who are not so familiar with Bible prophecies, where's the best place to start to get a flavour of what's going on with biblical prophecies?
Well, I would start in the beginning with Genesis, specifically in chapter 3, because it's really the first prophecy of the biblical prophetic narrative. And it states that the seed of a serpent will be at enmity, at war with the seed of the woman. And of course, we know 2,000 years ago that the seed of the woman manifested in the Messiah. The seed of the serpent manifests in Genesis 6, just a couple of passages over, a couple of chapters over from Genesis 3, where we see the fallen angels having sex with the woman, creating this hybrid being known as the Nephilim, which I've written numerous books about, lamarzulli.wordpress.com or lamarzulli.net, and you can check all that stuff out. The bottom line is we see the seed of the serpent manifest throughout history, and that's prophetic. That really sets up the rest of the biblical prophetic narrative. In fact, we know that the seed of the serpent will eventually culminate with the seed as being the Antichrist, the anti-Messiah. We read that in the book of Daniel, and of course we read that in the book of Revelation. So those are great places to start, but we have to understand that we are literally in a seed war, and it's ongoing even as we speak.
And you mentioned the Antichrist there and the mark of the beast. That's something that most people are familiar with, the 666, and no man will be able to buy and sell if they don't have the mark. And a lot of people have made reference to that. It could be barcodes, maybe it could be preceded by a stock market crash or a financial crash. Did you cover that particular topic in your new book?
Well, we didn't really talk about the mark of the beast. I've covered that in other books. I've covered that specifically in the book, The Cosmic Chess Match. Very long, involved, detailed description of what I think it is and why. And it's based on our scientific evidence and scientific exploration with the so-called alien implants. And that's all in Watchers 7, Watchers 8. And it's also in the book, The Cosmic Chess Match, as well as further evidence the book. So we sort of explored that. There's always new information, but I've already covered that. What we do talk about, what I specifically talk about in the book, is a coming financial collapse. And I think that is imminent. It's going to happen at some point. We see the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, flexing their monetary muscles, if I can use that analogy. In other words, they're trying to move the world off the U.S. petrodollar, which has been the default currency since the end of World War II. And of course, most people don't know this, but I believe that the war in Iraq happened because Saddam wouldn't play ball. In other words, he was trading his oil for and getting paid in euros. That's a no-no. You can't do that.
Would you say Putin is another person who's not really playing ball as well then?
Well, he's not. Putin, again, the BRICS nations are Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Look who's in the Middle East. It's the Ruskies under Tsar Vladimir, and of course the Chaicoms are there. The ante is up. Unfortunately, our POTUS, with all due respect, is a rank amateur. I'm quoting Charles Krathheimer, but I believe in Krathheimer's statement that Obama has no idea about foreign policy. And this is what's a crack up. It's like somehow he gets a pass from our idiot media over here, but people like Trump and Fiorina and Ben Carson, who really have no foreign policy. Well, they have foreign policy, but no in-depth experience. Well, Obama didn't have any experience either. And I mean, how can you bumble it worse than what this guy's done? And in my opinion, anybody's better than this guy. But I digress. The bottom line is we see the Chi-Coms over there with the Ruskies all over the Middle East. It is changing the entire landscape, the geopolitical landscape of that area. The Russians are in bed with the Iranians are in bed with Hezbollah. Both are mortal enemies of Israel. I mean, prophecy is unfolding right in front of our eyes. And here in the States, what do we get? We get, all the nonsense about Bruce Jenner's sex change. So it just shows you that, bread and circus rules, and real information is hard to come by.
A coming financial crash, would you imagine this is going to be...
Thanks for getting me back on track.
Would you imagine it's going to be like a catastrophic worldwide event which is going to just wipe out currency everywhere, or would it just be a sort of another depression?
Look, if the dollar goes down, if the dollar really crashes, it would be a global reset. And who knows what would come from that. I mean, some people speculated that the Iraqi dinar would come up. Some people say that the Chi-Coms. I mean, it's who knows. We know one thing, that the Ruskies and the Chi-Coms have hoarded tons and tons and tons of gold and silver. We know that. And there are some who believe that there's no gold at all in Fort Knox. I mean, who knows? Look, our entire government, in my opinion, with all due respect, and I love our Constitution, but our entire government was sold out a long time ago. When they shot Kennedy in Dallas, that was a coup d'etat, a classic coup d'etat, in my opinion. We're coming up again on the anniversary. That's why it's close to my thought process. There's never really been an investigation. The Warren Commission, in my opinion, was an absolute joke. Kennedy fires Allen Dulles, and Dulles winds up on the commission. I mean, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? So, unfortunately, the country was taken from the American people that day, and now we've got a very divided, wacky country, trillions of dollars in debt, with a leader who refuses to call jihadists what they are, Islamic terrorists. He refuses to use the words, and yet the Fort Hood shooter can stand up at Fort Hood, Major Hassan, and blow 13 people away, including a pregnant woman begging for the life of her unborn child. So, but we can't call that terrorism, can we? It's just unbelievable where we are in this country. But yeah, I think that a global financial meltdown is imminent. I think that's why the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, have coalesced and are attempting to move the global default currency from the U.S. petrodollar. They know it's weak. They know it's completely inflated. Americans can no longer buy an eighth of what they could buy, let's say, 50 years ago. The purchasing power of the dollar is way down. And with the $19 trillion in debt and our ridiculous Congress continually, moving the debt limit up and up and up, I mean, this is why a guy like Donald Trump is incredible and he's untouchable. This is why I'm constantly saying bully for the Donald. And, even though we don't talk about Donald Trump in the new book, I mean, there's a whole chapter on the coming financial collapse. And this it's just, I think it's imminent. I think that Americans need to understand what we're really facing here. Everything is completely out of control, and you can't fix this. You're not going to fix it. So it's just a matter of time, in my opinion.
And do you think this would be a prelude to a possible mark of the beast, or a possible sort of new digital currency, which could link in with prophecies in Revelations?
I've written 3 chapters in this book, Days of Chaos. Chapter the coming great deception, messengers of deception, the great falling away, and the UFO phenomenon. And basically, what I think triggers the mark is when they show up. And I used to think that, it's probably just one large mothership about a mile wide, hovering over, Moscow or Paris or whatever. I've changed that recently. Now I'm thinking it's many ships over the cities, large motherships, and then numerous small craft darting everywhere. This will create a climate which we've never seen before. This is the mega shift. This is the huge paradigm shift where the entire planet watches it all together because we're all linked up with the satellites. And, the whole world witnesses this. When they show up, Scott and Seth, I think that they'll have 3 things. The first thing is they'll have the free energy that powers the ships, which will completely blow everybody away. The second thing is they will give us technology, which we don't have, which is just unprecedented. So they'll have the free energy, they'll have technology, which will change everything. The third thing is they will say that we've got a small implantable chip, which is a DNA upgrade. That's how they're going to couch it, in my opinion. You insert this chip, it changes the host DNA, you will live 500, 800 years disease-free. Now, it's interesting that we've read about this. In fact, that's the whole point. Some of this is in the book. Some of these links to blogs and other newspaper articles which talk about longevity, 600, 700, 800 years being extended, lifespan being extended. It's all there. We're talking about it now. What if they have this chip? And what's interesting is we've taken them out of people who were abducted by them, who are, of course, in my opinion, are not aliens. They're interdimensional beings. But these implants seem to interface with the nervous system, and they seem, in my opinion, to be changing the host's DNA. And this is why we get the rest of the prophecies in the book of Revelation, this criteria which comes down, which tells us that anyone who takes the mark will wind up in the lake of fire. Whoa, there's no grace and mercy here. And the only time in the Bible, the biblical prophetic narrative, that we see the absence of grace and mercy is, of course, when the Nephilim are present. We see it in Genesis, where they're all wiped out in the flood. We see it with the Tower of Babel. Nimrod becomes a Geborim. The language is changed. The continents are split up. We see it in the complete and total destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. We see it in the mandate which comes down to Joshua and Caleb when they finally go in with the children of Israel to destroy the inhabitants of the promised land. Men, women, children, animals, burn everything. That's genocide. There's no way around it. That is genocide unless we are dealing with a hybrid entity that has no soul. And of course, this is where I think it's going.
So, just to be clear, who will be the who will be in the motherships? Are these Nephilim? Are they evil demons, or who exactly are they?
Well, what's interesting is we have reports coming across my desk. They're not frequent, but they are there, talking about hybrid entities that people are seeing. The hybrid beings look and pass human, but they're not. For instance, Pastor Mike McLeod saw one. And I'll tell you the story real quick. And let me back up. The entities in a craft, first of all, are not from the Pleiades. They are interdimensional beings. They are fallen angelic entities. The moment I say angel, people roll their eyeballs. They have no idea what an angel is. That just means messenger. So we have to throw our preconceived notions out the window. The Greys are also there, which I believe are created biological bodysuits for the demons, which are the disembodied spirits of a Nephilim to inhabit. A demon must inhabit something in order to manifest on Earth, and we see that in the biblical prophetic narrative. And that's why they're called demoniacs, because that demon then comes in and possesses them. I think the Greys are a biological constructed suit for the demons to inhabit. So we've got fallen angels running around in these ships. We've got Greys, and I realize this is stuff of science fiction. It's wacky. I totally get it, guys. It is. But when you start going down the rabbit hole, we realize that this experimentation, this program from these entities has been going on for decades. And then you've got the hybrid entities. We've got report of black-eyed kids. We've got reports of hybrid children with very stringy hair and very large eyes. That's decades ago. Now we've got reports of hybrid entities which look and can pass as human. Mike McLeod, now we're up to modernity. This happened to me about several months ago when Mike gave me this report, and I asked him about it, and that was included in our news magazine, which, by the way, we're giving away a lifetime free subscription to our monthly news mag with all sorts of great articles for a $100 contribution to our new TV studio. $100, you get a full lifetime subscription, and in 4 years you'll have it paid off. So go figure. Anyway, so Mike is out jogging, and you can do that by going to lamarzulli.net. Shameless plug. But you can, with Mike, he's out doing like a prayer walk in this park. And in front of him, about a couple hundred yards away, he sees this woman jogger coming towards him. And nothing wrong with that, nothing, alarming, except the hair in the back of his head goes up for whatever reason. He's on alert. He's not sure why. As she gets closer, he sees that she's very tall, 6'3", 6'4". Again, female basketball players are that tall, so there's nothing bizarre about that. She's got long, blondish, almost white hair and a ponytail. It's a little strange, but still nothing that abnormal. Very athletic, and she's coming running towards him. As she gets about 20, 30 feet away, he sees that she has very pale blue eyes. The closer she gets, he's kind of taken aback by just the striking luminance of her blue eyes. And as she's about 10, 15 feet away, the eyes change from pale blue to solid black. At this point, Mike is in a warfare position. He is now rebuking her verbally out loud, telling her that nothing that she passes, no foul and unclean thing will come upon him. You know, he cancels any curses, vexes, hexes that she might put on him. As she runs past him, she turns to him and growls. Now, I'm not making this up.
That would freak me out, that's for sure.
It would freak everybody out. Are you kidding me? Mike's been around this stuff, so he's seasoned, which is why most people would cower. He immediately started saying the blood of Jesus, started rebuking her in the name of Yeshua, which is that's why we clothe ourselves in the armor of God daily, and we understand that name, Yeshua, Jesus, is above every other name in the entire universe. She responded. She growled, and she kept on running. Who knows what would have happened if, he didn't do what he did. So we think that these chips are very real, that they extend the lifespan. We believe that this hybrid program is ongoing, has been ongoing. Dr. David Jacobs has a new book, Walking Among Us, or They Walk Among Us, which talks about the integration of these hybrid entities into society. Dr. Jacobs and I agree that the phenomenon is real, but we differ as to who is behind it and what is behind it and what is the ultimate goal. So, but we know it's real. And that's why I highly recommend this book, and I'll probably have him on our show sooner than later. So that just gives you a little idea of what we feel these chips are, who are in the craft. Look, when these guys show up, Scott and Seth, it's a game changer, man. Are you kidding me? I mean, it's the ultimate game changer. And that begs the question, does the revealing of the so-called extraterrestrial presence tie into the Second Thessalonian biblical prophetic narrative, which states that don't let anyone trouble you by word or letter, but the day of the Lord has come and are gathering to him. For that day will not happen until the great falling away, or the apostasy in the Greek, which the actual word in the Greek is apostasia, where we get our word apostasy from. And the Greek word apostasia means apostasy. It can also mean departure, but not like a rapture. It means departure from the faith. So what's interesting is we're told that this great falling away won't happen, or the son of perdition, get that, son of perdition, that's the Antichrist, will not be revealed until the apostasy happens. And what begs the question is, what would cause millions of Christians all over the globe to lay down their faith? In my opinion, and if you don't know it a priori beforehand, it's so easy to be deceived. Yeshua warns us, even the elect would be deceived if that were possible. Men famed from fearful is coming upon the earth. You start putting all these ancient prophetic texts together, and it appears to me, and then look at what's happening, what's manifesting in modernity, and it appears to me, it seems reasonable to me, that what is coming is the revealing of a so-called extraterrestrial presence, which is the ultimate game changer, the mega lever, which will change everyone's paradigm.
Well, LA, I mean, how many millions, if not billions of dollars have been spent since, I mean, and you yourself there are of the age group perfectly to remember the Star Treks and everything like that, of the start of the space craze and the extraterrestrial craze there and everything like that, to get people truly obsessed with this aliens thing to the point that they could view religion in such a antiquated sort of a term there of just, oh, that's old hat. That's stuff of yesteryear. The future is aliens and alien deities and alien religion and all sorts of madness there. And it's disturbingly simple to see how easily people would fall for this.
You know, guys, I think we're close. I think the younger generation, my daughter's generation, 20, basically the people, the men and women who are in their 20s, they're not hit 30 yet, they'd swallow this stuff in a New York minute. And that's where we are. I mean, look, the countries of Mexico, the UK, Brazil, Chile, Germany, France, Belgium, Portugal, and Japan all have come on the record, France, and all have come on the record and said, look, the UFO phenomenon is real. The Cometa report that the French put out. Look at the UK. Look at England a few years ago. Yeah, these things are flying around. We know they're there. Case closed. I mean, when America finally admits that's going to change everything, and there's soft disclosure happening, not on a weekly basis, but it's they're always moving that agenda with movies, with guys like Leon Panetta who leave the Obama White House, and the first thing out of his mouth is, oh, I wish I had done more to reveal the extraterrestrial presence of the American people. What? I mean,
exactly.
What? What is that? And everybody just goes, oh, there's Leon Panetta far out. I wonder what Bruce Jenner's doing this week. Or, hey, honey, what's for dinner? Oh, yeah, the World Series is coming up. I mean, this is where we are. It's bread and circus, bread and circus. Meanwhile, soft disclosure is happening all around it. You got to have eyes to see and ears to hear.
Of course. And I mean, well, here's something that I wanted to see how you could tie in with this, LA, and if you'd seen this in the news there. NASA releases images of enormous 8,000-year-old patterns or geoglyphs located in the steppes of Kazakhstan. Yeah, had you seen any of that? And I wanted to see how you would tie that in.
Please send me a link. I'd love to look at it. Look, there's two histories. There's the history that we read in our schools, which talk about Ponce de Leon and Christopher Columbus, and it's boring as all get out, and bump, 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 bump. Or there's the history that we're not told, and we're not told the real truth. We're not told that there was an advanced civilization here thousands of years ago that had technology which defies what we have in modernity. When you go down, you talk about, the steppes in Kazakhstan. When you look at Peru, where I have been, and Sacsayhuaman or Ollantaytambo, or you look at the Teotihuacan pyramidal complex in Mexico, or look at the Great Circle Mountain in Ohio, all these places have one thing in common. The technology has been lost to us. The American archaeologists would have us believe that the Great Circle Mountain, which is 1,200 and some odd feet in diameter, and in some parts 20 feet high, was built by Native Americans with dog sleds, birch bark baskets, and primitive digging tools like clamshells. And if you believe that, I got some nice bridges I'd like to show you. And the same thing, the archaeologists in Peru try to tell us that Sacsayhuaman, huge megalithic stones, some of them weighing over 120 tons each, being transported 40 miles away from a quarry, that the only way you can get to it is by horse, even today, with a 500-foot to 1,000-foot drop on the left side as you go up. And the quarry face, they didn't take them from ground level. They took the stones from up on the face of the quarry. You can't do that. That's impossible. And you can't move those stones down a winding goat trail to Sacsayhuaman when there are no beasts of burden that can move 120-ton stones. It doesn't work. It doesn't work, and it's everywhere. There's something that's happened on this globe, and I've written about this in On the Trail of a Nephilim Volume 1, On the Trail of a Nephilim Volume 2. There is something going on here, and we're just not taught. We're not told about it.
Yeah, and I wanted to move things on to we could talk about that for quite a while, but I wanted to move things on to natural disasters, which I know you talk about a bit in your book.
Sure.
In relation to end times, I mean, in the Bible it talks about earthquakes in diverse places, and obviously we've had some of those. I mean, I used to live in Fukushima, so familiar with what went on there, and I was in Phuket, Thailand for the tsunami in December 2004.
Good grief.
What kind of topics do you cover in your book about natural disasters and how it ties in with end times?
Well, you mentioned Fukushima. Interestingly enough, there's an entire chapter on Fukushima. I blogged about it again tomorrow. I haven't released a blog yet. I'm still working on it. But Fukushima is an ongoing global catastrophe. I mean, what happened in Fukushima is ongoing. Millions of gallons of water are still being pumped in the Pacific Ocean, which is all radioactive. It's polluting the Pacific, and at some point, you're going to kill everything around it. The people still cannot go back into the Fukushima prefecture. I mean, is it business as usual or something more? When Yeshua utters this ridiculous statement, earthquakes in diverse places, I mean, it's almost like he's tipping his hand, because going back 2,000 years ago, how would you know about an earthquake if you lived in, let's say, Jerusalem? How would you know about an earthquake in Fukushima? A 9.1, you wouldn't know about an earthquake. Now we know everything because we're hooked up the geo satellite network, which beams everything at the speed of light all over the planet. Everything is monitored, hooked up, wired together. And so now we know. My iPhone rings if I have anything over a 6.0. Bam, my iPhone will ping. 6.0 earthquake, thank you. So we know we can keep track of earthquakes in diverse places. If this is not the fulfillment of biblical prophetic narrative, I don't know what is. A 9.0 earthquake which caused Fukushima. You talked about the earthquake in Thailand. I mean, unbelievable. How big was that earthquake? 8.0, 9.1. I mean, these are global events which we now watch in real time because of a geosatellite network, which when they light it up, the whole world can see it, can see what they're showing all at the same time. They don't do it every day. the globe, the network, the global network doesn't light up like that, where everything is in tandem, everything is in lockstep. No matter where you turn, everyone is talking about, the Fukushima disaster, whatever. It doesn't light up every day. I think that one of the next ones will be World War III in the Middle East, when they really start going at it. Notice that they're keeping what's happening with the Ruskies in Damascus, and we actually put a drone footage on the blog last week and kept it up there for people to see it. And it begs the question: Is Damascus already destroyed? We don't know. We know that the outer cities and towns all around Damascus are dead zones. There's nothing. They're just war zones. They're reduced to rubble. So the question is, how much of Damascus has been destroyed? And the question is, does that actually tie back into the biblical prophetic narrative, which Isaiah, a prophet about 2,500 years ago, discusses that Damascus has become a ruinous heap? There are those who try to tell us that that's been fulfilled. I don't think so. And other of my colleagues don't think it's been fulfilled either. And if that's the case, if it has not been fulfilled, then what are we looking at? The Ruskies are down in the Middle East. Damascus, watch the drone footage. Go to my blog, lamarzulli.wordpress.com, and look at the, have to scroll down and find it. Look at the drone footage, and you tell me what we're looking at. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. The whole place has been reduced to rubble as far as the eye can see. So is it, I'm not putting a check by Isaiah 17, but my gosh, how much more, before that happens? So look, the bottom line is we are in the days of chaos, which is the name of Watchers 9, the movie, which is almost 2 hours long, by the way, and Days of Chaos, the book. We interviewed Dr. Brooks Agnew for Watchers 9, Days of Chaos, and Dr. Agnew comes in and starts talking about the real threat of an EMP. Now, I've been studying this for, a while, and there's also part of the chapter in the book, Troublesome Times. We talk about the rise of the threat of an EMP, electromagnetic pulse weapon. What most people don't understand is that the Iranians more than likely have a nuke which could blow up us back into the Stone Age. And what I mean by that, all the Iranians would have to do is take an oil tanker, retrofit it, put a missile launcher on it, and we know that they already have missiles that will go 200 miles into the atmosphere. They put a warhead on that thing, they park it in the Gulf of Mexico, they launched the missile. If we're asleep at the wheel and that thing is detonated, it's toast. Because what that will do is it'll send an electromagnetic pulse weapon over much of the heartland of the United States. The entire electrical grid goes down. And what most people don't understand, it doesn't come back on in 2 days or 2 weeks, maybe not even 2 years, more like 4 to 5 to 6 years. And at that point, you've got millions of people who have died. If it happens in the wintertime, the old and the young will die within the first week. Millions will die in the first week. That's what we're looking at. And what most people don't understand, this will impact every aspect of society because the refrigerator doesn't work. The trucks that are rolling with the produce doesn't work. Nothing works. Life as we know it in the United States comes to a crashing halt. And isn't it interesting that the United States, in my opinion, is not mentioned in the biblical prophetic narrative? We're not there. And I've posited this and talk about it in my book, Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural. I've written 9 books, guys, and everything ties together. It's like it's an opus. It's just an opus of work. I mean, there it is, and it's just and it's ongoing. But the bottom line is, if and when it happens in America, isn't it interesting that we're not part of the biblical prophetic narrative per se, and an electromagnetic pulse weapon would take us out completely.
And I mean, the world has become completely dependent on technology. It's kind of a foolish step, really. Everything's become so reliant on electricity, on computers. The people who are sort of going back to basics and living off the land and growing their own food, etc. I think they're going to be the ones in a stronger position if any of this societal collapse happens.
Well, I mean, they will be, but here's the problem with that whole scenario. It's like if there's really an EMP in this country, you'll be looking at martial law, which will disintegrate within the first month. You'll be looking at people pulling their resources together and creating clans. In other words, it goes back into like a feudal system where clans, the good guys will have clans and people like tribes that will team together. The bad guys will immediately, that criminal element will rise, and we'll see roving gangs, rape, killings, all sorts of stuff to take what people have. So it'll be complete and utter anarchy if an EMP happened. Don't believe me? Go and study what happened in Katrina the first week.
Right. Will this be the time that the one world government sort of come into power? I mean, most people talking about end times talk about a one world government, and we've got the EU and the United Nations, but it hasn't quite actually joined up to become a one world government. Do you think that will happen in some catastrophic, if some catastrophic event happens?
Well, let's say the EMP in America wipes out half the country. So we're no longer a global power. And let's say there's a war in the Middle East in tandem with that. I think that's when they would show up. And this is my take on it, Scott and Seth, that I think that when the UFO people, the intruders show up, as my friend Gary Stearman likes to call them, the intruders. When the intruders show up, that could create the one world government. That could coalesce the countries of the world into a one world government. It would certainly, we have to join together and join our galactic, federation or whatever.
And the Bible talks about false Christs and false prophets. And I wanted to ask you what your opinion of the Pope is, the current Pope. He's become quite idolized, and he gets a lot of good press. But it's some people have questioned where his religious beliefs lay. What's your opinion of the current Pope and the Vatican? Is the Catholic Church a force for good or evil?
Well, I'm not going to call it evil. I mean, that's when, millions and millions of people who are Catholic. So we can't just broad brush like that. However, there are elements of the church and the church doctrine which really spawned the Protestant Reformation. That's why Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the Wittenberg door and just said, this is bogus, this is bogus, this is bogus, because there was no biblical precedent for any of it. And bully for him. Francis coming over, talking about, we've got to help the poor, and I'm all for that. I mean, I get that. But what he leans towards a communist viewpoint, and that won't work. Communism doesn't work. He also, I'm trying to think of what they call this. It's a theology. It's not replacement theology. It's something else. My mind
Liberation theology.
Thank you, Seth. Liberation theology. He's an Argentinian, and he's a proponent of liberation theology, which is nothing more than communism dressed up in Christian clothes, in my humble opinion. And so
which makes it all the more dangerous.
Absolutely. I mean, I look at this, and I'm not impressed with hats and vermin and attendants and Pope mobiles and jewels and all this nonsense. I mean, it's just like all this is man-made gobbledygook. This was all invented over the centuries, the last 2,000 years, as was the Vatican, with all due respect to Catholics, as was the Transubstantiation. Google that, and when was the Transubstantiation? This magical, changing the blood or the wafer and the wine into the blood and body of Yeshua. That's why in Catholic churches, he's always up on the cross. In Protestant churches, he's not there. And we're not going to sacrifice him over and over and over again. And with the Catholics, and I think if any person, if you could take and show them in what the context of the Last Supper is, then things would change. And of course, the context of the Last Supper is a Jewish Passover Seder meal, where he takes the afikomen and he breaks it. And isn't it interesting that the afikomen, even 2,000 years ago, had marks in it, like a scourging. Hello? And he goes, this is my body. He's saying that what you guys have been doing since Passover with Moses, this is my body. And then he takes the cup, which is filled with wine, and he says, this is the new covenant. I mean, when you look at it in conjunction of a Passover Seder, the entire transubstantiation thing just comes crashing down as a man-made gobbledygook thing. But remember, in order to justify a priest, you've got to have the priest do something which the layperson can't do. And only the priest can do the mumbo-jumbo and the Latin phrases and, the rubbing the chalice and blessing this thing and the bells and all this other nonsense, with all due respect, that somehow magically changes the wafer and the blood into, and I mean, look, my parents are staunch Catholics, and my dad has Alzheimer's. And a priest came over and he just said, this is the body and blood of Jesus. And I just said to myself, no, it's not. Just making this stuff up. You guys are making it up. And that's what I take umbrage with. Deep offense. I really do. Because it's not biblical. You're just, show me in the Bible where it's there. And you can't. And the first 200 or 300, 400 years of the church, there was no transubstantiation. No one did this. Nobody. So you know, look, there's a lot of good Catholics out there. There are a lot of well-meaning good Catholics. People in my family, you know, are good practicing Catholics. But I also pray that they would come to know the Spirit of a living God and be born from above, because that's the game changer. That changes everything. Then it's not just this ritual over and over and over again. Then we meet, you know, the risen Savior face on, and everything changes.
It does seem to be that the Pope is worshipped quite a bit as well. I mean, people bring their children to him, and I don't know, that seems a bit odd to me. But I just wanted to ask you also about the Marian apparitions. What are they? I mean, could they be satanic, or are they? What do you talk about them in your book as well?
The Marian apparitions is a whole chapter on it. I show actual Marian apparitions over a Coptic church in Egypt that happened in 2009, and you know, there it is. I mean, there's 4 blobs of light. One has this like blue, looks like a veil, but it's not. There's just 4 blobs of light. Christians and Muslims are out there clapping and chanting, you know, there's the apparition. Who knows what they're saying? But there's thousands of them. And this apparition continued over the Coptic church night after night after night after night, just like Zaytun decades ago. Same thing, that allegedly, oh, it's Mary the Bible. No, it's not. It's not Mary the Bible. You know, Mary fades from the scene in the biblical prophetic narrative. Mary is not mentioned after the book of Acts. Okay? Now, is she revered more than all women? Absolutely. She is the God bearer. I get that. You know, is she worshiped? No. No. What does she say? I'm a sinner just like everybody else. So, once again, you know, I talk about Fatima. I talk about these ongoing Marian apparitions, which are continuing. You know, they're not going away, and we need to begin to deal with it. And I think this is part of the coming, what I would call the coming Great Deception.
Talking of the coming Great Deception, what about Israel? It's been widely condemned by many people when it comes to Palestine and some of the things that have gone on there. But I mean, obviously, both sides are engaged in some kinds of atrocities. But I think in your book you talk about the rise in anti-Semitism. What kind of things do you talk about?
Well, I mean, this is what's amazing. The rise of anti-Semitism is unlike anything I've ever seen. I mean, it's just, you know, there are sections in France, and I talked to my friend Dan Gordon, who's got dual citizenship, Israeli and United States citizenship. He's also been in like 6 or 7 wars in Israel, and he's still in the reserves. I mean, this is a tough old guy, you know, and he's been around. He just said there are sections in Paris, if you parked your car and it had a Star of David on it, and you parked that car and left it overnight, you'd come back, there'd be nothing left of your car. That's where we are in 2015. We're now getting Nazi swastikas in different colleges. The rise of anti-Semitism is unlike anything I've seen or heard about, and I obviously was not born in the 1930s, but this is what it's similar to. And isn't it amazing? I was on a show recently where some guy was trying to tell me that all the Jews back in Israel were the synagogue of Satan, and I took him to task. And I said, you know, he's trying to tell me the whole Khazarian lie thing, that the Jews are really the Khazars, and we don't know where the real Jews are. And I said, this is all nonsense. This whole Khazarian thing was invented in the 1850s. It's been debunked numerous times. And the synagogue of Satan thing, which you constantly tell us and show us, has nothing to do with Israel being regathered. And how do you look at Israel being gathered back into its ancient homeland and somehow dismiss that? Then you're dismissing the biblical narrative, which says very, very succinctly, specifically in passages in Jeremiah and elsewhere, that in the latter days, in Ezekiel 38, I will gather you from the four corners of the earth and reestablish you in your ancient homeland. Hello? If these are not the Jews, then who the heck are they? And it's a straw man argument, and, you know, racists likes to use it, and anti-Semites use it continually, and every time I'm on a show like that, I shoot it down as often as I possibly can.
I wonder how the Israeli government is going to play into end times prophecy.
Well, Israel. Look, are there Luciferians in the Israeli government? Are there bad people there? I'm sure there are. Just like there's bad people everywhere. But to say that, you know, this whole thing is some sort of Illuminati thing is just nonsense. Read history. People need to go back and understand at the end of World War II, when the Jews were desperately trying to get into Jerusalem and into Israel, they were turned back en masse by the Brits, by the British fleet. They couldn't get in. and they were reinterred in some of the same concentration camps that they had been liberated from. I'm not making this stuff up. Now, they weren't concentration camps anymore, I get that, but no one knew what to do with these people. The British fleet would not allow them to come in. Finally, Israel had to fight for the right to exist. 5 Arab nations attacked them, and they defeated them. All of this is part of the biblical prophetic narrative, in my opinion. We are looking at the nascent beginnings of the Ezekiel 38-39 war, which is coming. Israel is now surrounded by those who have one mission in life, and that's to kill every Jew on the planet. And that's where we are. All this was prophesied, and unless people understand that there's a supernatural dynamic to the anti-Semitic bent that we see on a global level, they're clueless. And I've written about this, not in this book, but a couple of books back, The Cosmic Chess Match. That's why it's there. But the rise of anti-Semitism addresses it in the chapter from the book. If these aren't the days of chaos, guys, I don't know what is. I mean, what's it going to take to get people awakened to the fact that this isn't business as usual? We're not in Kansas anymore. We're like so far down the rabbit hole. And look, let me wrap up because I know it's coming to the end of the show here. Let me wrap up by just saying this. We're never going to change the ideology of the mullahs in Iran. We're not going to change Vladimir Putin. And he's not going to take his Russian horse and go skipping merrily back to Russia. That's not going to happen. We're not going to change the ideology of radical Islam, which seeks to wipe out every Jew. We're not going to change the ideology of Islam in particular that basically wants the Islamization of the entire world. We're not going to change ISIS, who wants to fly the black flag over the White House. We're not going to change the fact that 1 billion abortions, and there's a whole chapter on that, the abortion holocaust, 1 billion abortions have happened on this planet, and there's millions more even as I speak. We're not going to change that, and those are just a few of the topics. We can't fix this. We can't. And the fact that we're looking at record earthquakes, record volcanic activity, record floods, record droughts, everything that I just talked about has been prophesied in the biblical prophetic narrative, which states that there'll be wars and rumors of wars, famines, pestilence, earthquakes in diverse places, troublesome times. Guys, if these are not the days of chaos, I don't know what are.
A lot of people always want timescales. Does it not say in the Bible that Israel will become
no
a
man
nation?
knows the day or the hour.
But about the your generation shall not pass if once Israel becomes a nation. Do you subscribe to that idea that 1948 and a generation beyond that would sort of indicate that it wouldn't be too far away and maybe in our lifetime?
I would put the generation from the capturing of Jerusalem, which is 65 or the 67 war. Look, Jerusalem was the capital, and the Israelis never had control of it until the 67 war. That's where it really starts coming down, from the 67 war. The prophetic clock starts ticking in 48 when Israel becomes a nation. But here's the deal. In my opinion, it kicks in overdrive in the 67 when the Israelis finally have the western wall of the temple and they reclaim the old city of Jerusalem.
For people who want a bit of confirmation that some of these prophecies are coming true, what would you say would be the next sign to look out for? Is there a sort of next step for people to look out for to sort of indicate we are living in end times?
Well, that's the whole point of the book, literally. The whole point of the book and the DVD is when you read the book or watch the DVD and you start looking at this, you got to ask yourself a real hard question. Is this really business as usual? Are all things continuing just as... Go back 50 years, folks. Go back 50 years. It wasn't like this. It wasn't. We didn't have the plethora of earthquakes, the volcanic activity, the bee die-offs, the ongoing famines, the Marian apparitions coming out of nowhere. We used to have 50 years ago 1 or 2 sightings of UFOs. Now there's thousands of them every month. I mean, I'm not making this up. Read the book, Days of Chaos, lamarzulli.net. Avail yourself of vital cutting-edge information. We also tell you what we think you should do. And here's the deal. People go, oh my gosh, I can't listen to this guy. Oh, that's doom and gloom. Folks, all I'm doing is telling you the words of Jesus 2,000 years ago. And I'm saying if you don't know him, if you think you know him but you don't know him, then you don't know him. And what's happening is there's going to be a regime change in the not too distant future. When the return of the king, when Yeshua, Jesus, rides back with the armies of heaven, that's the game changer. Laugh, scoff, roll your eyes. I really don't care. That's part of the biblical prophetic narrative, and it will come to pass. What is written will come to pass. What is foretold will unfold. What is written, we are seeing on the 6 o'clock news. It's unfolding right before our eyes.
Amen, man. Anything to share with you there, LA, and the audience as far as websites where people can purchase your books, look at, listen to more of your work there, anywhere that they can do more research on what you're talking about?
Absolutely. You know, you can avail yourself of everything we just talked about, all 9 books, all 9 videos, countless DVDs, lecture series, lamarzulli.net, lamarzulli.net. Check it out for yourself. We'll also be up and running, hopefully, with our new TV show sometime in January, God willing. Folks, check out the Days of Chaos, because that's where we are.
Yeah, I hope the rest of your tour goes well, LA, and it's been really nice chatting to you. It's always a pleasure, and you're always welcome to come back and chat to us.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Seth. Pleasure to be here, guys, and stay safe.
Yeah, you too.
God bless.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.